morning, everybody. My name is Elisa Nikono, and I thank Linnervik for the very kind introduction. Indeed, we are going to present to you a debate. But before we start, as this is not a debate speech yet, that I am doing right now, there are a few little points that I will have to let you know. First of all, the motion that we are going to debate then is that early programming education break or accelerator in child's development. And what is important about that is that we are going to do it in the American parliamentary debate style. And what is most important to understand firstly is that we are all expressing an opinion here which doesn't necessarily, which is not necessarily our own opinion. It means that we have divided between ourselves the sides and therefore also the proposition that we need to defend or oppose. Could I please have the next slide? Thank you. So just so that you could have an overview of what is going to happen here is that we're going to have 6 speeches, and as any game or competition usually has, there are quite strict rules of timing, and therefore the first 4 speeches will be 6 minutes long, and the last summary speech is 4 minutes long. And another point that you wouldn't find too surprising or confusing that you would need to know right now is that we are going to have points of information as well, which means that during every speech, the members of another team can stand up and ask for a point of information, and the speaker is obligated to at least several of these points to accept them and also to reply to them. This is means of making this debate more interactive. And all of us, we are representing the social enterprise of SpeakSmart, or more commonly known in Estonia as väitluskoolitus. Therefore, that is all I need to say for introduction, and I myself will stand there and with Sten Andres be the proposition side, while Sandra and Siim are the opposition. And I would like to therefore give floor to the first speaker, who is Sten Andres. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, when 25 years ago a child went to a computer and printed there, "Print hello world," it was a big thing because the computer replied. Nowadays, when a child goes to a computer, simply having a computer say hello world is nothing because they always have computer games. Yet, nowadays we need more and more people with the capabilities to program, to code. For example, here in Estonia, the next day we could hire 3,000 people who could code because simply we do not have enough. This means that we need our children to learn to code, to program, and yet we need to encourage them because simply starting code is not enough for them. This is why we as the government of this debate would like to propose a plan. The plan is that all children starting from the elementary school should learn how to code, how to program in school. This means children between the ages of 7 to 11 years old, and they should do it in their schools. Of course, this does not mean that they are going to learn Java or C++ or something like that, but rather they're going to start with simple languages of programming, for example, Scratch, for example, Alice, for example, Hackety Hack, for example, Lego Mindstorms, and so on and so on. There are plenty of programming languages that are developed especially for children. We are going to use them. Most of them use graphical interfaces. Most of them, for example, allow you to put, so to say, code together in the style of puzzle pieces, that everything has to fit graphically and so on. Most of them involve some sort of figures starting to move on the screen. Everything is very much like a game, and with most of these languages, the aim is to create an animation, a game of your own. For example, a Mother's Day card for your mother. So basically, very creative things, very easy things that you're going to develop for yourself. So it is programming, but of course we do not mean as programming coding in notepads, but rather programming languages that are specially developed for children. For example, Scratch, for example, Alice, as I said, but also there are plenty of these languages created here in Estonia, as we're going to have a program like this starting here this year and next year. Yes, please.
Can you please explain us now, how are we going to get those 3,000 programmers if we're just going to play with those kids like that?
Yes. So basically what we're going to do is that children are going to start in elementary schools. They're going to learn through these games the elementary concepts. For example, what is a code? For example, how do you start a code? For example, what does a if function mean? Because you need to, well, make a puzzle piece there if someone clicks to this and so on and so on. And later on, of course, they're going to develop their skills. Later on, if they're older, they already know what are these functions, and therefore they're more able to do things as well. This is also why we're going to, for example, buy computers, educate teachers, and so on. But this is, of course, understandable. We're going to do this in addition to what we already have, not instead of anything. Now, going to the arguments, I'm going to have two broad points in my speech. First of all, is it possible? Secondly, what are the benefits of it? And Elisa is, of course, going to elaborate on these points later on. So, is it possible? Yes, it is. We think that children, right now, if you have children of your own, you probably know that children are very intuitive in computers, in different devices. For example, children that are 3 years old are very able already in iPad. They can play all sorts of games and so on and so on. If we use these children programming languages for them, they're able also to so to say, start coding in computers. This is not the first time it is done. For example, in Los Altos, in California, this is in Los Altos District School, a program like this has already been done. Children started to code in Scratch. They created games of their own. All of the children were able to do that. Of course, some of them needed more aid, some of them needed less aid, but all of them were able to code. This, in a moment, this included those who were from poor backgrounds, those whose families did not encourage programming and so on, but all of them were able to do that. Estonian example is going to prove that, I'm sure, as well. Yes.
Could you please explain why math isn't enough for developing these skills that you want to have?
Thank you for your question. This leads me very well to my second argument. What are the benefits of starting to code in schools? So what we think is that elementary school, as school in broad, is meant for understanding the world. We educate people in chemistry, in physics, in history, and so on, because these are the things that form our world. To understand how the world works, we have to understand also the history. But now the thing is that our world is starting to change. So programming and coding and computers are affecting the world more and more. And this is why people also need to understand how black box called the computer works in order to understand how the world works. And now, we think when we start to educate people how to code in schools, they are basically, or in elementary schools, they're going to get an introduction also to programming later on. In a similar fashion, we start to educate children in coding, in science, in nature, and also, for example, in home studies, to get them introduced into chemistry, physics, and so on. Also, we think that this is basically going to give them skills that they need later on through basically playing. They're going to understand how for example, different skills, how logic, how, for example, random numbers, how coordinates and so on work in schools, because they need these skills in order to simply create their games, in order to create their projects. So basically, through playing, through creating their own things, they're going to integrate different subjects, also different skills like mathematics, to coding. And mathematics on its own does not work, because it doesn't give you enough logic, enough programming, and so on. So in broad, it's possible, and it gives you understanding and skills that you otherwise wouldn't get. This is why we would like to educate all children, even in the elementary school, in programming. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, what Sten was trying to say is that we have a certain group of people that we need for the state, and that is why we would have to program these kind of people for the state to be happy. But what we want in the end is happy people. We want happy children doing what they want, studying what they want, and developing in a nice, free environment which helps them to maximize their full potential. This is what we are standing for. So I am going to talk about 2 points. First of all, I'm going to talk about the child's development, and secondly, I'm going to talk about the expenses, that even if we get some benefits, it always comes at some expense, and these expenses are not worth trying to teach programming in elementary schools, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I will offer just a few bits of rebuttal. First of all, I do not agree that the fact that we will let people or children play with iPads and in a very playful manner, which is very great, does not lead to people going to universities to study IT or programming, ladies and gentlemen. And this is the link that they have failed to prove. And this is their goal, so they really should prove that link. Secondly, about the argument that it is possible because children are able to play with them and they are able to learn programming, then yes, we agree that they are able. The question is, should they? And we say that they shouldn't. I'm going to show that in my argument. And then about understanding the world, once again, I think it comes at some expenses, and children are very well aware of what is going on in the world. In the 50s, or even a bit earlier, take you in a second, when we had a technology revolution, we didn't start teaching how to make cars, for example, because then we had to understand how the world works as well, but we still did not provide these kind of subjects, and so I don't think it's relevant. Don't you agree?
Sandra, I think that most of the people are simply afraid of coding, of programming. If they start already in elementary school, this fright of programming, of coding is going to get away, and this is why people are going to learn code later on as well.
I do not agree, Sten, because I'm going to touch on that subject a bit more later on, but people already have problems with math in elementary school because it's so abstract. And it's not a natural thing for people to think in numbers or in some kind of logical ways of numbers. That is why it's really hard for elementary schools children even to learn math, not to mention programming. So I would firstly like to talk about the children's development. We already said that our goal is the full potential of a child. We see that every child is an individual with different interests and different things they are good at. And this comes out already in the elementary school because with the education system, we provide them different grounds. Like Sten said, we provide them with nature studies for them to know how the world works. We provide them with math for them to develop logical thinking and, well, maybe buy things in a shop. And then we teach mother tongue for people to know how to speak correctly and know grammar. And these are all the basic things that we provide. We do not see what is the gap that they are trying to fill with programming that math doesn't already cover. Because, as I already said, it's really hard for children to understand math because it's abstract, it involves a lot of thinking in numbers, and it's really hard to do for children. No, thank you. What we are trying to say is that it already doubles the general knowledge that we do provide, and secondly, tilts the scale towards science studies that we do not want to, because as I already said, we want to provide an equal ground for every child to discover and develop the skills that they are best at, and this is best done with providing all kinds of different subjects, but not programming, which actually would double math. Sten.
Sandra, I think that programming is not abstract, but rather putting abstract math into real figures as people can see what math actually means in computer language, what it means on your screen.
I do agree, but it's you comprehend it as a grown-up. In an elementary school, it's very hard to understand even the 1 + 1 is 2. So even in that context, programming is just as hard. Now, cognitive scientist Daniel Willingham has also stated that it's really, really hard for elementary school children to study math because of the high level of abstraction that they have. So, in the end of this argument, what I'm trying to say is that it is irrational to double the studies that we already have. It's not good for the child's development because they cannot develop freely and decide what they're best at and what they actually like, because we are forcing them into some kind of frames, and we want the child to be more free and happy. We don't think it's justified. And secondly, even if there would be some kind of benefits that Sten tried to say, it comes at some expenses. Now, first of all, there are two factors that affect the child. Firstly, it's time, and secondly, that it will increase using computers. Now, talking about time, if they will add another subject to elementary school children, ladies and gentlemen, then picture this: children who already go to school 4 or 5 or 6 hours a day, being only 7 or 8 years old, it's already really hard for them. And if they have to take another subject, it will take away more time from them. And that time will come at the expense of outdoor activities, at the expense of sport, at the expense of playing with your friends. And now, ladies and gentlemen, playing with your friends is really important for you to develop social skills, for you to be able to interact normally in your everyday life when you grow up, for you to have relationships, for you to know how to share. So what we're trying to say is it really takes away a big part of social skills that are super important. And secondly, it presses a lot of stress on children, because it's 70% of children already suffer from stress and anxiety disorders because of the high amount of classes that they have to take every day. So we are trying to say that it's not worth it, ladies and gentlemen. We stand for happy children. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, in my 6-minute speech, you are going to hear more about 2 major benefits of teaching programming to elementary school kids, which are, firstly, that by that we can create creators and not mere followers of others as the next generation. And the second major benefit that I am going to talk about is that teaching programming to children is an equalizer in the society, both in gender terms and in terms of socioeconomic status and stratification of children that there currently is. But before that, I will directly rebut some of the points made by Sandra. Firstly, she says that teaching programming to children is somehow forcing them into frames, which couldn't be more false. It is a completely fallacious understanding of what programming is. For example, the example of Los Altos School District, the children themselves who took part in the classes described this as an art form. They said that they love programming because it is something that makes them able to do anything. And it is basically, there are no limits. You can do whatever you want. So we don't see how it is anyhow forcing people into frames. Secondly, she said that when we started making cars in the society, we didn't start teaching children to make cars, and therefore we shouldn't make them learn coding, which is a wrong analogy, because as of cars, it is just a little part of the society, and it is something that can indeed be created by a small sub-community. Whereas as of coding and computers, there is a field that is growing exponentially, and cars do not run our e-voting, or do not in the future perhaps run our cars as well, or these that do not make such important decisions for us and are not such an important part of our everyday life. Whereas computers and understanding the artificial intelligence and how this works is so essential that it is something that everybody needs to understand to some extent. Yes, please.
Miss, I haven't learned programming. What have I lost?
Oh, Siim, you have lost very much. And perhaps not even in our generation we can get by without this skill. But think about how much the world has changed in the last 20 years. The World Wide Web was not invented until a few decades, not more than a few decades ago, and how much exponentially everything is changing. Therefore, even if Siim can get by and think of himself as an intelligent member of our society right now, then in future generations it will not be possible without the coding skill, because it will be everywhere. And therefore, that is the reason why we need it. And I know just a few more points of rebuttal was that it is not fun for children. Also, another rebuttal for the Los Altos district, as I already said, children said that it was indeed very fun for them. So we don't believe that, that it is somehow too difficult. And as Sandra said, that even maths is too difficult, mathematics is too difficult to understand for children. Yes. Mathematics is much more difficult and much more boring to learn than programming, because you do not see some flashing results as in programming. If you create the game, you can play this game and everything is moving and it's so much fun, whereas in mathematics you don't see the results so quickly, so there's a big difference. Okay, she also talked about some harms, how children have less time for playing and for developing their social skills. Once again, I have to bring the example of the Los Altos school district, where the majority of the school project, the programming projects were developed in teams. And also the children in feedback said that this whole project was important in developing their team player skills. So programming can also be a team activity. We do not see how playing on the playground or running around in the streets has to be so imminent and done so much that there will be no time for programming. Okay, but now moving on to the first major benefit about creating creators and not followers. I would like to quote to you a 11-year-old child who had been using the program Scratch. He said, after using this program for a while, he said, "Now I have what I call a programmer's mind. I think about how everything is programmed. This has gone from toasters, car electrical systems, and so much more." This is really something very important to understand, that by teaching children to code, we are teaching them to be the creators. We are also doing the same thing by teaching children to write, to sing, to draw. But the problem is that these forms do not always work for every child. For example, I am very good at writing, but not good at all at drawing or singing. And if there is a child that is good in none of these three, then programming gives a fourth option of expressing, of expressing himself. And for very many children, it is a very tempting option, because for children, computers are something interesting, something that attracts their attention. So in essence already, that something is on a computer, it attracts children's attention, it attracts their interest. So it creates another opportunity, it gives another tool to children that they can use for being creators. And not only does it give them an ability to be a programmer later in the world, but it also makes them think as creators, makes them think of themselves as not just mere users of everybody else's products, but a creator themselves. And that is something that is really carried over to all the fields of life, and that makes them later on more bold to become entrepreneurs, for example, instead of mere employees. Therefore, the benefit is huge there. Moving on to the second argument, it is an equalizer in society. What I mean by that? It is that even though Sandra pointed out that we haven't proved to you a link that anybody would go after learning coding at school, that anybody would go on and become a programmer later in life, as Sten explained to you, it takes away the fear that children might otherwise have before computers or before something so ambiguous and difficult as coding. It takes away the fear. Therefore, it increases the possibility that these children will go and study on programming. But it is not even so important that all of them do. But it is important, exactly as Sandra pointed out, that child's happiness and his prospects of future success are important. It gives another opportunity for these children to become a programmer. And as in our society, it is a field where when you are qualified, it is almost impossible to be unemployed unless you perhaps have a very bad personality, but that is another problem. But that is something that indeed gives to all the children that get this education a possibility for a decent salary, for a decent work. And it is something that is very important because otherwise, coding will become more and more important exponentially in our society. And otherwise, if we do not teach that at school, then it will be only an elite skill that only the richest parents who have computers at home at first, and also who are themselves able to teach these skills. Only the richest parents are going to teach that to their children. But what this universal program does, it gives the opportunity to everybody, which is very important. And also, it is very general for our society, for parents to think that computers are somehow a boy thing, or girls shouldn't learn it, which can very much decrease the possibilities in later life for the girls who have not learned that. Therefore, also it can be an equalizer by teaching that to everybody, and just, although it perhaps should be evident already, or obvious, but to point out how it can be a girl thing is that my favorite example of Los Altos School District, there it was the voluntary project that everybody could take. It was taken up more by girls than by boys. So the interest is there if you give the basic skills. But that was just one point. So what I have proven to you here about those two major benefits is that firstly, we create people who have creator mindset and not a follower mindset, which is important in so many different aspects in life. And secondly, that it will be an equalizer in society by decreasing our socioeconomic stratification as well as the gender gap of having less opportunities for women. And for those spaces, I'm really proud to propose this motion. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, this place, Los Altos, it must be a great place where unicorns fly and there are rainbows everywhere, and we program and we do teamwork, and all the children will be great creators. Firstly, we think that we can teach every subject like that, like they do it in Los Altos with programming. We say we can teach math as well like that, so it would be engaging, it would be fun for children. But what we do not see is why do we have to double the essence of science subjects, math and programming? Why can't we use these great methods like teamwork in math? Now, Elisa told us that we need to create creators, not followers, and that the world is ever changing. And as I consider myself an intelligent person, I would not be able to cope in a future world. I don't think that. 50 years ago, when we finally found out the great joys of electronics, we started using all of those gadgets we use right now, which are all filled with little pieces. I have no idea how they are made up. They fill our world right now. I have no idea how they work. But I still cope in this world. And we think that it's sufficient to teach math and general subjects so the kids would learn and get interested in these subjects, and later on, not in elementary school, they would specialize. Now, Elisa said that we need creators, and this would give another opportunity, ladies and gentlemen. It would give an opportunity to program. Sure, we could teach engineering, we could teach architecture in elementary school, we could, right? Why don't we do that? It's because we have limited resources. It's because we have limited time resource. We cannot teach everything, and that's why we have to make a choice. And now I ask you where this choice lies. We say that we try to use the elementary level to broaden the minds of children, and we can do this by not specializing on special skills like programming, rather than teaching general subjects like math would be. Elisa.
That is the very thing about that. You brought the example of architecture. Architecture is based on drawing skills that we do teach to children, but coding is something completely different. It is something that belongs next to drawing, writing, and singing.
Well, yeah, sure, of course. But we can create creators by not only using programming, and I don't see how this computes when we compare math. Why can't we do it like that? Now, moving on to Elise's second point, she said that it's a great way to reduce inequality. Well, it's great that our proposing side brought inequality out. Sten in his speech said that, hey, we're going to buy computers, all the kids can work on computers, and Elise elaborated that, yeah, now or even the poor children can work and program. We see this as a really big flaw in their case. You see, education is pretty funny. It's meant to dissolve those gaps that we have in our society, the inequality. But instead, in many cases, we can look at the United States, for example, it actually broadens those gaps. Why? Because the money in education is already so unequal. If there are schools who cannot provide textbooks for their pupils. Now, how are these schools going to provide computers? How are these schools going to provide those experts who can teach programming so the kids would become those great creators? We're saying that this will actually make this gap even wider. And if the education gap is wide, then our social gap or the differences between different social groups will become to this vicious circle when if I don't get good education, I don't get a great job, I don't have enough money to put my kids through great schools. So this actually works against this principle of equality that the proposition side tries to state. Now, we told you about the child's development, and well, we have agreed. Both sides have agreed that we have to utilize or maximize the full potential of children. And now we have two questions here. Firstly, how do we do it? How do we do it right now, and how they are proposing we should do it? Well, we say that right now we're trying to cover all the angles. We have different subjects, languages, science subjects like math, like science or chemistry, and we're trying to cover all the angles so the children can find what they like and develop firstly in elementary level on all those on all those scales, and later on specialize. Now, the question here is that if we start to specialize so early, what are the problems that we can see? Firstly, if we weigh the benefits of programming, we can agree that there may be some benefits, and that there may be some children who find this really interesting. But do all children find it interesting? We brought you an example that math already is really difficult for children. We brought you an example that children are stressed in schools because they do not have enough free time. They don't want to go to school. Think of your own lives, right? Did you want to go to school? Or how much did you want to go to school? And now, if you look at the PISA international studies of education, we see that those countries who have a really filled curriculum, like Singapore or like Estonia, they have great scores on this in this survey. But their children are the most unhappy pupils of the survey. And what does this indicate? It indicates that when we overwhelm them with different subjects, especially with subjects they are not really good at, then we are going to have a counterproductive system. The children are stressed, do not want to study, and maybe even get a negative attitude towards learning. And now, secondly, we haven't really discussed the issues of social disadvantages that our children are going to get. Firstly, like Sandra explained, that I didn't really hear a rebuttal, was that, hey, our children, instead of playing, running around and talking to their peers, are going to sit behind computers and program. Fine, okay, even if they do it as a teamwork, we feel that they are really there are many other disadvantages. For example, health issues. The United States Academy of Pediatrics have said that the main problem which comes with excessive computer usage is obesity and the loss of vision. And we see that if we enhance this problem, if we make children work more behind computers, we're firstly going to lose the social aspect, and secondly, we are going to lose our children's health. So for these reasons, I beg you to oppose.
I was sitting on a bus the other day and I heard two ladies speaking. And the ladies, I think they were about 70, maybe even 80. And they were discussing whether they should uninstall Skype because it had crashed or not. And these ladies did not study programming in elementary school. Neither did we, nor did you. And we still find that we have e-voting, like all these wonderful programs in today's world. And this is where I would like to ask the question, where is the problem, ladies and gentlemen? Where is the problem that we don't have enough innovation, we don't have, I don't know, different solutions, technical solutions? We don't see the problem here, that we should actually overwhelm these kids in elementary schools to solve this some kind of unexistent problem. So, first of all, there's no problem. Everything works fine. The education system works fine. Our society works just fine.
Madam.
No, thank you. Now, I would like to move on and compare the benefits and the cons that we brought out. First of all, what do we have to win or lose then? First of all, they said that we could understand the world then. Well, first of all, like we already said, we do understand the world perfectly, and we don't think that we have to go into details in every subject to see how the world works. And just like we said, that we don't have to know how, I don't know, engines work, and we don't have to study that in elementary school. That is also why we don't have to learn programming in elementary school. And I just want to make one thing clear, ladies and gentlemen, and do not get me wrong, we love programming and we think it's a really great thing. We just think you shouldn't teach that in elementary school. And the second thing that we brought out, like to oppose this understanding of the world, is that we actually hinder the understanding of the world because you do not have enough social skills to communicate with other people. Although computers are really important and really cool, we still need to communicate on an everyday basis. We still need to know how to be polite, how to share things, how to solve problems, for example. And these are the things that we learn when we play with other kids. And if we learn programming instead of playing other kids, we just do not have time to acquire these social skills, ladies and gentlemen. And the second thing is the stress that we brought out. Like in addition to the fact that you cannot play with other kids, although you might at some point think it's really, really cool to like hang with your iPad, then in the end it actually isn't. And the second thing is that we will provide too much stress for the kids, and they will be they will have anxiety, they will have overworked and not happy, and they would even not like to go to school to study other cool things. Now, the second thing that they brought out is that they would think of themselves as creators. And we constantly have asked them, please point out why programming, and why do we have to double the science studies that we already have with math? And yes, there was the Los Antos school is really a really nice place. But ladies and gentlemen, it's not because they teach programming, it's because they teach things that are visual, that they teach things like through iPads, but it doesn't have to necessarily be programming. In Estonia, an Entrum program last year was won by kids who developed iPad school books. And these are really cool as well, and that will make children want to go to school. And yes, they will say it's nice, but it doesn't necessarily say that we have to teach programming, because we say it doubles the things that math already provides, and we don't have to push children to take more subjects. We would just have to develop math, for example, for that to be more interesting. And then Yes, and then this broadens the gap between people, ladies and gentlemen. That's what we are trying to say. It does not equalize people out in the end, because we said, first of all, all the people do not have the same possibilities. For example, some kids can go home and also practice programming, but some really can't, and that's where the gap begins to kick in. And that's, in the end, some people get better jobs because of that, and some people get worse. And then we will broaden the social gap in the end. So, ladies and gentlemen, I do not see any kind of benefits in teaching programming in elementary school, though I think programming is really nice. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, I started this debate and I'd like to conclude it as well with a short speech this time. So I think in this debate we had two major questions. First of all, why do we need programming in schools? Secondly, do we have the time for it? Now, going to the first question straight on, we think that actually the world is going to be based on coding, it's going to be based on programming. They have always said to us that the world used to be based on industrial products like, for example, cars and so on. Yet we do not learn how, for example, cars work in school. This is false. We actually do. We learn how physics work, how chemistry works, and so on and so on. So basically, school is anyway dedicated to making people understand how the world works, and programming, coding is going to be in the very same line, because we are going to understand how computers work, and computers are going to be the major part of the world in the future. In fact, I believe that in 50 years, for example, every job is going to have coding, programming in it. For example, if you need to use Excel, if you, for example, you need to make a sum there, if you need to make a simple if function, this is coding as well. The problem is, people are simply afraid of it. Because we think that programming is something very fancy, it is something that we cannot understand. It's something that happens in a black box that only elite partner, thank you, of the society can understand. Now, this is why we should educate people already in elementary schools, so that people would understand that programming and coding is not something that only the most educated people can do, but that everyone in our society can do. No, thank you. We think that if we are going to start already in elementary schools with Scratch, with, for example, Alice, we are going to make people code. If they're not going to be afraid, all people have at least elementary skills. Those who are more talented probably are going to start to enjoy it. They are going to code in their homes, in their free time as well. By the time they get to universities, no thank you, they are going to be master programmers already. And this is why we're going to get these 3,000 programs that we need in Estonia the next day. So basically, we need programming because we want people to understand. We need people to have these skills. And this is sufficient reason already to teach programming. Now, the second question was, do we have the time for it? And they almost said to us, we do not have time. We need our children to play on the streets. But the problem is that never brought you any kind of evidence how much time actually children have. We think they have plenty. We think they have enough actually to play on iPads in their homes right now. We think that instead of going to Facebook, instead, no thank you, of doing all the stupid things on computers, they should instead code. And we think this is the time recess we are going to get to them. We think, as Elisa said, programming and coding must not be sitting on a computer in a dark room and ruining your health. Instead, it might be something fun, it might be creative, it might be something you do as a teamwork. And yes, they say that Los Altos is a good school and we shouldn't bring this as an example, but we think Los Altos, because it is a good school, is what we should use an example. This is how we should teach programming, and the fact that it's only one school doesn't mean anything. So basically, what we have proven to you is we do need coding, we do need programming, and we do have the time for it. It's not going to ruin the childhoods of our future. On these grounds, I beg to propose this motion, and I would like to thank you for listening to us. Thank you.